Hi, welcome to Katrin. And again, Katrin is the story of the young lady Friday in the book How Yoga Works before she got to India. So this is the story, her story of how she learned the Yoga Sutra. And part of that story is how she learned the ancient ideas of the Geshe course and how she won in a Geshe debate 1,000 years ago, all right, before she came to India. So we're picking up at a debate. All right, this is a Geshe debate. Chapter 34, War is Waged. When you want to prove something to somebody, when you want to show them an idea that they haven't thought of yet, you must use a reason, correct? Drome was saying, using very simple words now, a kind of taunt to remind Didila of how hopeless the situation was. But Didila had already begun to change. He looked down calmly at his Geshe hat lying on the bench and picked it up. He put it on slowly and made a fuss of adjusting it, which gave him an excuse to look over to the side and see the secret messages I was giving him with my hands. She's sending him messages. She's debating for him. Okay. Left hand up once. Correct, Didila replied. That's good, taunted Drome again. And a reason can be defined then as something which proves what you're trying to prove. Correct? Didila touched his fingers to his forehead as if to give it a thought and glanced under the hands to my hands to see what I was showing. Right hand up once. Not so, said Didila softly. Drome looked startled and called out, What did you say? I nodded up and down. A big, exaggerated nod. Not so, repeated Didila, trying to sound sure of himself. Drome took a step backwards and corrected himself in an instant. Or can we say, rather, that a reason can be defined as something that proves in three different ways what you are trying to prove. Didila scratched his ear and glanced to the side, right hand up. Not really, he called back to Drome with growing confidence. His tone alone brought a good number of eyes back to the battle. The monks were all bored because the debate was going so badly. But now people are like... A tiny shadow of doubt flickered across Drome's eyes. But he smiled widely and boomed, Well, I guess then we can't really define a reason at all then. Right hand up twice. Of course we can, silly, cried out Didila. This brought a titter from some of the monks sitting up close to the pavilion. Then is the definition, huffed Drome, drawing himself up. Not precisely, he roared, what I just said it was. And he brought his hands down in a tremendous clap, right in front of Didila's face. Right hand up once, followed by my first two fingers. Oh no, not at all, said Didila, with a tasteful little touch of the tone you would use to correct a child. The faces in the first 10 rows were now all glued on his. What you just gave is the definition of something else, continued Didila. Something totally different. And what would that be, blustered Drome, stamping his foot with real anger now. Good, I said to myself, good. Nothing like a touch of anger to keep your mind from thinking straight. I held my hand out from under the shawl and joined the thumb and first finger in a circle, which in our country is like a thumbs up. Why, what you gave was the definition of a good reason, replied Didila without a single stutter now. A good quarter of the monks had stopped their little conversations and were staring at him in disbelief. A reason, Didi-La concluded on his own now, is defined only as anything which one gives as a reason, whether it makes any sense or not, which is actually correct. The mother of any young child could tell you that, he threw in for good measure, and the crowd in the courtyard roared with delight. This was getting interesting. Drome froze for the slightest moment, and his eyes fluttered up towards the three thrones. These are the three judges of the Geshe debate. To the face of his uncle, the founding father, who's the bad guy. And I looked there too and saw a deadly glitter in the eyes, shouting wordlessly, "Crush him." Drome nodded slightly and turned back on Didi-La like an enraged tiger, and the real battle began. I can't tell you how long it went on, and I can't even tell you everything we said. The ideas flowed back and forth like bolts of lightning, clashing, thrusting, counter-thrusting like blades in the hands of swordsmen. Centuries of wisdom flew by as we ripped apart the thoughts and insights upon insights of generation after generation of the greatest sages of Mother India and her newborn child, Tibet. And as much as I disliked so much of what he was, I could never deny that Drome rose fully to the challenge. These are real people, by the way. He was brilliant, awesome, flying across the pavilion floor like nimble fingers on a loom, striking where he could and dodging when he had to, returning relentlessly. My hands flew back and forth like hummingbirds, and Didi-La had to keep one palm up on his Geshe hat the whole time, covering the eyes fixed off to the side on me. Long Life, which is the dog, right? He stared out of his little peepholes, spellbound, a welcome warmth against my chest. Every once in a while, I looked over Didi-La's head at the occupants of the three thrones, the three judges, high lamas. The precious one's face was aglow with pride for the warrior's performance. The ancient one was looking on with obvious joy at the wonderful battle, his mouth wide open in a toothless grin. The founding father showed only a deadly and ever-growing concern that the contest was obviously so close. I could feel Drome feeling it, and the extra pressure every glance at the founding father put on the young man. And the debate master, Geshe Lothar, stood still and silent amidst it all, wrapped in his specter's cloak. Novices worked through the crowd and poured bowls of hot tea for monk and villager alike, but there was none for the warriors. This is a real Geshe debate. By tradition, they would go on all night if they had to, without a moment's break, croaking out their questions and answers in parched voices as the battle wore on. Only one monk among all those assembled had the power to stop the warriors, and he was not the abbot, or the founding father, or even the ancient one. Only the debate master, only Geshe Lothar, could call the war to an end. And he would do so only when, in his mind, it was clear which warrior had prevailed. That is, unless one of the warriors gave him what we call the look. The look is a very subtle thing and a very sad thing. If a major battle is being fought in the courtyard, say a Geshe examination, or a contest between the champions of two different classes, a way out was always left open for the two warriors, in case one of them absolutely felt he could not go on. This saves the young men from a major embarrassment, and possibly a scar that might take a long time to heal, if they simply reach a point of exhaustion so unbearable that they could not continue. And it was all done in a split second, so that oftentimes almost no one watching the battle even notices it. You just catch the debate master's eye in a certain way and then let it go immediately. A few minutes later, he will call for the fight to end. At some point, the torches were lit. I didn't see it happen. I just realized that Didila was straining to see my hands. And I looked around quickly and I saw that it was all dark. There was a torch up on the gatepost, and I thrust my hands out from under the shawl into their light as far as I could without risking someone seeing me. At another point, though, I glanced around and I saw that there was little danger of being spotted. There was not a single sound in the entire courtyard, nor among the crowd at the wall. Everybody was staring at the warriors, entranced by the flow of ancient words, even when they had no idea what they meant. And I can say that none of the villagers, and not that many even of the monks, could follow what was happening. And this happens at ceremony. The villagers come and they watch, and they have no idea what's going on. It was more the rhythm of drums, hand claps, and the replies that Didila threw back at them, and the dance of the attacker across the pavilion floor. But the claps and the dance were wearing on drum, and I saw it as the grueling hours passed. It was just the end of winter. The great debates were often scheduled to celebrate the welcome arrival of spring, and the night was turning frightfully cold. The monks looked on, bundled up in their shawls, and pulled their cloaks over their heads. And the villagers huddled closer, glad now for the warmth. But amazingly, no one was even thinking of going home. Drome, never pausing, slashing, swinging, long after his arms should have dropped from his body, was covered in sweat. Every hour or so, in the middle of a question or a leap, his hands would come up and rip another layer of ceremonial robes from his shoulders, cinching them around his waist like armor. Blood was flowing freely over his hands from the claps, and I've been there, and the blood just spraying in your face. And little droplets of red were splatting all over Didila's new golden robes. And then suddenly I noticed the claps were getting fewer and weaker, and I sensed that Didila and I might be able to end the war now if we could hold on and strike even one really strong blow. I took a good look at Didila, though, and I saw that it might already be too late. His head was drooping, and his voice was nearly gone. Somewhere during the last few exchanges, and I hadn't even noticed, he had dropped his hand completely from his hat and had his head turned directly towards me on the side, looking for the answers and calling them out to drum from the side of his mouth. I held my palm up to my cheek and I turned my head to the side, and Didila caught it and switched his head back to drum. But something was wrong there already. I saw Drum glance down at his friend's stick, and there was a quick exchange of the hand signals they'd been using for years at the courtyard to gang up on the other young men. Stick nodded and looked up and started scanning the wall in my direction. I pulled my hands back as far as I could. A few seconds later, Stick nodded to Drum, but then waved his hands to each side, as if to say there was nothing he could do, locked in on the far side of the crowd, sitting up on the pavilion floor. Then about a minute later, there was a whole stream of signs from Stick and then from Drum to Hammer, who was squeezed into the last row on the near side. And then I saw Hammer's powerful form come up into a crouch, and one leg came down off the pavilion to the courtyard flagstones, and he dropped down into the first row there. He started picking his way through the rows, slowly, crouched like a cat, headed for the courtyard wall, up towards the side of the pavilion. My heart stopped cold. If Didila and I were going to pull this off, we had to do it in the next few minutes. Drome had drawn himself up for the new attack, but he was obviously beginning to crack. The founding father's eyes, bright like embers, traced the young man's every move, critiqued his every word, darted this way and that in immediate judgment. And so when the final argument came, it was delivered in a voice that wavered with weariness and a growing fear of failing the father. Chapter 35, when 1 is 3. Now all the things in our world, all the things around us, began Drome, exist at one of 3 different layers or levels, and he clapped his swollen hands one more time. Left hand up at the wall. That's correct, returned Didila's tired voice. And things at the first layer are easy to perceive. Things at the second layer are difficult to perceive. And those at the third layer are very difficult to perceive. What's that in Tibetan? Droned Drome almost automatically, for this was a standard presentation from the old Indian textbooks on reasoning. Left hand. Again, correct, Didila, in a hoarse whisper. After sending the sign, I glanced off to my left. Hammer had nearly reached the wall, about 50 feet away from where I stood. Hurry, I cried inside to Drome. And to perceive the things that are easy to perceive, we simply use our senses, our eyes, our ears, and so on. Or it could even be our minds when, for example, we listen to our own thoughts. Drome had covered himself well, no sense making a stand at this point. Left hand up. Correct, wheezed Didila. And for things that are difficult to perceive, we must use reason. We must stop and think and figure them out, correct? Left hand. Just so, nodded Didila. I could judge Drome's fatigue just from the lack of controversy in the ideas he was laying out. And for things that are extremely difficult to perceive, well then, we first find a person who can establish is completely knowledge and truthful, and then ask them to tell us all of these things. Am I right? Left hand, right. Hammer was having trouble getting down the wall through the crush of monks in the very back, but he was still no more than 30 feet away. I glanced around me desperately. There was nowhere to go, no way out. Behind me there was only the bulk of the giant farmer, and to each side a solid wall of monks. And I couldn't leave Didila like that anyway. I turned to face the battle for as long as I could. But isn't it true that it is quite impossible to give examples of the things that exist at each of the 3 layers? Asked Drome innocently, and I saw immediately where he was leading Didila. But we had no choice but to go there, into a trap that might well mean our end and not Drome's. And so right hand twice, cautiously. Hammer was held up only 10 feet away, trying to step over some particularly stubborn clump of novices, which is everywhere. No, not impossible at all, said Didila, blissfully unaware of where that put us. Drome raised one hand stiffly and brought his hand down into a clap that sent a grimace of pain across his face. Show, he cried, and spun around to show his back to Didila. This is a warrior's way of saying that he doesn't expect any good answer for quite some time. Coming around, Drome held his head up to the wall and spotted Hammer. He looked down the wall straight towards me as if to say, it's over. Now the word show means what it sounds like, show me. which meant that Didila would have to come up with good examples of the things that each of the three layers of reality. This was no simple yes or no. The classical examples were in the ancient books. The color and shape of the sun was at the first level, easy to perceive. The fact that there is nothing in our whole life that has not come to us from how we treat others is at the second level. Difficult to perceive unless we can think it out carefully. And to perceive just what it was we did long ago towards someone else, which has now come back to us as any particular little detail of our life, a cold, say, or even a cancer. This is extremely difficult, and we need the help of someone else, someone who knows. But all these were not something I could send on my hands to Didila, and Drome knew it. Hammer burst through. In a few strides, he'd be on me. And then, this is a real debate that happened. And then, under the pressure, my mind suddenly broke through to another level. I waved my hands in a big circle and mouthed, everything. Didila looked back confused. Hammer was at my side across the wall. I gave Didila one last nod, calmly. Everything, he shouted back at Drome, sensing the impossibility of it all. Everything is at all three levels. Drome turned around to face his enemy with a look of utter disbelief. Everything, he whispered. Everything, uttered Didila with finality. Drome's face jerked in a strange spasm. The words you just said, he croaked. The words you just said. Are you telling me that even the words you just said exist at all three levels? Hammer's hand came up and tore the shawl from my head. I didn't even look at him. I raised my left hand proudly in the full light of the torch. That's right, said Didila. And in that moment he grasped where we were going, and the rabbit led the lion to his downfall. Drome didn't think. He just began taking Didila through what we call the check back. Are you saying then that your words exist at the first level? Are you saying that what they mean is easy to perceive? Didila nodded. Yes, he said, and then he abruptly added, and what you really should ask me now, my friend, is for whom? Go ahead, ask it. Drome stared at him in total exhaustion, entirely spent, and there was nothing else he could do. For whom, he said. For me, said Didila calmly, and pointed his finger to his chest. Drome continued dumbly down the check back. And do your words also exist at the second level? Is their meaning at the same time also difficult to perceive? Didila nodded and mouthed, for whom? For whom? Asked Drome in strange obedience. For them, I think, said Didila quietly, and gestured towards the wall to the crowd of villagers. I finally glanced at Hammer. He felt something coming. He was standing half-turned to me and turned halfway back to the battle. His eyes fixed on Drome with a pained look, his hand on the wall, the other still in the air, clutching my grandmother's shawl. And do your words, breathed Drome. Do they simultaneously exist on the third level? Is their meaning also something very difficult to perceive? Didila nodded without a word. His big scared eyes went to Drome's and drew the last words out. For whom? Said the warrior. Didila lowered his hand from his hat slowly, ever so slowly, and he pointed straight at Drome. I saw the big boy's face change as he went through the choices. Agree that he didn't know what Didila was talking about? Disagree and say that he did, but had needed Didila's help to do so? and so had asked his questions, and thus agreed by disagreeing? And then something inside him broke, and one powerful shudder shook his whole body, and he just stood there, his strong shoulders heaving up and down, his eyes staring blankly at the ground. Well, I mean, but... And then he just stopped. The courtyard went into total silence, as silent as the cold, glittering stars in the dark above our heads. 1,000 faces fixed on the broad back and shoulders, pumping up and down now, in jerks now, as if Drome were sobbing. But his eyes were dry and I saw them, and they went up to the throne where the Founding Father sat bolt upright, his fists raised before his chest in frustration and fury. And then the eyes dropped back to the ground, but somewhere on the way they paused for the tiniest instant and met Geshe Lothar's and gave him the look. Chapter 36. The sun rises from a very unexpected place. The specter, the debate master, stirred for the first time in all those hours. The arm came out straight out with the cloak, waving like the, this is how they called it, waving like the wing of some great eagle, and he called out. And his voice rang through the entire courtyard and to the wall, and beyond it, far into the night, crying, "O La Soul," which is to say, it is ended. I brought my hands down to the cold stone of the wall, and only then realized they were completely numb with cold, and the hours of holding them up to Didila. Drome turned and slumped down on the examination bench next to Didila. He bent over and buried his face in his hands. Thin little streams of blood started flowing down his arms from the cracks that had opened up between his fingers. Didila sat up straight, just staring straight ahead, and instinctively brought his hand up and laid it on Drome's shoulder to comfort him. The chanting master, sitting in the first row up on the pavilion, began a few brief traditional prayers to conclude the battle. People started looking around to collect their things and began to talk to their neighbors again. Monks around me were already beginning to ask each other why the debate master had stopped the contest in the middle of an argument. And I had already heard someone say, maybe one of them gave him the look when the chant had stopped. And Geshe Lothar did one of the kindest things I have ever seen anyone do. It was years really before I fully realized how kind it was. For in a single moment he saved the Founding Father, and he saved Drome, and he saved Drome from the Founding Father, and he saved a lot of other people. Saved us from years of hard feelings, recriminations, doubts, and pride. Saved really the peace of our monastery. And it was all because he stopped the specter in the cloak. He stepped suddenly between the two young warriors, stood there between them, and silently placed a hand upon each one's shoulder. Then he turned and raised his stone face to the three thrones. "A judgment," explained the young monk at my side. "The debate master has called, he's called for a judgment. He stopped it for a judgment." An excited murmur raced through the crowd, and those who had begun to stand sat down again suddenly, and the hands stopped moving and the voices fell silent. All eyes went up to the pavilion again, to the three thrones, and whatever rumors had begun died in their throats in that moment. For the debate master had also this one further absolute power in the courtyard where he had stood for thousands of hours, tirelessly, over the last 10 years, bringing his young warriors into their strength. Only he could call for a judgment. Only he could stop the battle, knowing that a Geshe had proven himself. There was a terrible silent moment of suspense. Didila's face was turned calmly up to the cold night sky in sheer resignation. Drome's face never came out of his hands. And the specter stepped again, directly behind Drome now, and he put both his hands on those two powerful shoulders. The stone face turned again to the thrones. The precious one, the abbot, had changed completely. His face was bathed in a soft golden light, a kind of absolute serenity and sacredness, like a very pure young maiden. He turned his head slowly and looked over to the side, at the throng of villagers at the wall, and then in a kind of perfect grace, carried his gaze across the entire courtyard, and to the warriors seated on the timbers beyond. And then his back went straight as a rod, and his head came up in a look of pride for the wonder he had witnessed that night. A birth, really. And then he looked down into the stone eyes of the specter and nobly nodded his head once. The specter looked at the founding father, who nodded his head quickly 3 or 4 times in a quick, nervous gesture. Then the father's eyes and the specter's and everyone else's fixed upon the Ancient One, for all three must agree. The Ancient One's face burst out again into that huge, toothless grin of joy. He's the real guy. And he nodded happily like a child, asked whether he would like a piece of candy. And still it was silent, totally silent. My heart began to pound loudly. So loud I was sure everyone could hear it. And I felt I was going to faint. Long life stirred against my belly, gently, and it kept me there. The specter moved to Didila and put his hands on the thin little shoulders. The boy dropped his head and stared nervously at the ground. The abbot smiled and nodded. The founding father stared furiously at the faces of the other two, and then gave a curt nod. The Ancient One agreed to his candy a second time. A Geshe had proven himself, as had another. The entire crowd, in a single voice, in a single instant, broke into a cheer of approval. I don't know if I can... Just as suddenly, a silence broke out, beginning from the pavilion and spreading to the last villager at the wall. The Ancient One was struggling up on his throne, trying to stand, but the hours of sitting and cold had left his legs useless. He waved his arms down at an attendant, who climbed the stairs to the throne and lifted the aged monk up to his feet bodily, and practically carried him down the stairs. The Ancient One shuffled forward to the bench and came around to the front, fumbling inside his robes for something. And then he pulled out a shining silken white kata, a long, thin scarf of ceremonial greeting. He hobbled over to Drome and gently lifted the young man's face from his hands. There was a wide smudge of blood across one cheek, and he looked up at the Ancient One with glazed eyes. The old monk patted him on the shoulder and reached up and softly wiped away the blood. And then he carefully draped the scarf over the big boy's neck and hugged him, pressing his forehead against the top of Drome's head. The crowd went wild. This was an ancient form of congratulations and a high blessing from the greatest warrior in our whole part of Tibet. The Ancient One held Drome for a long moment there like that, and then straightened up and looked him in the eye and gave him a proud nod. And that brought Drome out of it, and he looked up like a little boy, and with a wan smile thanked the old man. Then the Ancient One stepped towards Didila, but went on to the side without a word or a gesture. The little monk cast his eyes down, and I did too. And then I heard a murmur rising through the crowd, and I looked up. I saw this also. The Ancient One was standing at the side of the bench, on Didi La's side, looking harshly into the eyes of his attendant, who was still holding him up. The Ancient One was demanding something, and the attendant again refused. But then finally the old man just pulled his arm away and set both his hands down on the edge of the bench and fell down on one knee there. And then he slowly took off his ancient Geshe hat and lowered his forehead and touched it to the bench. The crowd gasped as one. This was more than giving Didi La a blessing. It was asking for a blessing. The Ancient One was saying without words that Didi La had fought as well as any of the great warriors of the olden days in Mother India. And when the head came back up, the crowd broke into sheer pandemonium, a roar of excitement and happiness. Happiness for the two young men, happiness for the monastery, happiness for the precious knowledge itself, and for all those who kept it alive in the world. Monks jumped up and rushed for the stage of the pavilion. Others pulled off their Geshe hats and waved them widely through the air as they danced in circles. Villagers turned to hug each other in joy. I burst into tears of exhaustion and relief and elation and sadness, wishing my brother Tenzing were here and my grandmother to hug and dance with him. Long Life felt the surge of the crowd and could simply no longer contain himself. He burst out of the baby sling and leaped onto the top of the wall, barking with joy to match the cheers of the people. He raced up and down the length of the wall, singing to the sky, with his long, beautiful tail flying behind him, stopping at one point to leap up and snatch Grandmother's shawl out of Hammer's hand. Hammer stood staring at the little lion and me with a dull, stunned look. I couldn't help myself and just raised my head to the sky, laughing and laughing and crying and laughing. I couldn't stop. And maybe a few minutes or a few hours later, I looked again to the pavilion. The Ancient One was being whisked away from the mob on the arms of 3 or 4 sturdy attendants. The Precious One was leaning back in his throne and regarding the whole melee with the look of an indulgent daddy. The Founding Father had come down the steps of his throne and was standing with Drome off to the side. The young warrior's eyes were down, looking at the ground, and the father was surveying him with a strange mixture of pride and disappointment. Then I saw Stick come and stand between them. He took the Founding Father by the arm and put his mouth up to his ear and said some words, and then pointed over towards where I was standing. And then suddenly Stick was staring into my face with resentment, and Drome too was looking at me with a kind of angry pain. And I felt Hammer's eyes too like that, and finally the cold eyes of the Founding Father waking into a realization of what had happened, slowly turning upon me, glowing in fury. And then I did something that I know was not very wise. And it was another of those things that changes the course of our lives. I raised my head proudly in the torchlight so that the eyes, all those eyes, would know who I was and never forget. And then I grabbed Long Life in my hands and whispered in his ear, "Sorry, little lion, just this once." And I turned him around then on the top of the wall, and I grabbed hold of his tail, and I lifted it up to show the father and the terrible trio exactly where the sun had just come up from. This is a reference to a Tibetan joke that if something impossible happens, the dawn sun has come out of the asshole of a dog. So they all know what she's doing. And then I took one long, last sweet look at my dear brother Didi Lao, still sitting there on the bench, surrounded by a mob of delighted monks, pounding him on the shoulders. Then I whirled away from the wall, and there was the face of the giant farmer. She convinced the farmer to move for her so she could give her hand signals. And she told him the baby's uncle was debating. And there was the face of the giant farmer, very red now, and he opened his mouth to say something, but my baby and I were already gone, dancing through the crowd to the horse road. Okay. There's one more reading. There's one more debate. There's always 2 debates for a Geshe degree. So in the next debate, Didi La has to be the attacker, and he can't rely on anyone else. So we'll be reading that when? In a week or something?
It's Friday night, Geshe. It'll be the 26th of August.
That's all. We finished there's an audio book. You can get the audio book. You can listen to it in your car. And I think it's fun to have. Okay. All right. Connie, anything else?
Well, we did leave some time for Q&A, 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
If people in the audience have questions for us. Can they unmute Tim?
No.
Oh, cannot. So we'll look for your questions, and then we'll speak them out loud.
You guys got to ask a question, or else Grandpa's going to go home and go back to bed. Any questions? Okay. Doesn't have to be about that.
I have one from the previous class.
Okay.
Someone asked for help explaining the pen story to their friend. She said she told her friend the story, led her through with logic, but when she came to ask the question, who is correct, the dog or the human, the puppy or the human, her friend said, well, it's still a pen because people are intelligent creatures and people are advanced animals. So a pen is not wrong. So she's asking for assistance to explain this to her friend.
Yeah, I think all of us, when we explain the pen thing, oftentimes we'll hold it up and we'll say, oh, how does the dog see the pen? Which means we believe it's a pen. You see what I mean? So we will say, how does the dog see the pen? Which is already not fair to call it a pen. You should say the stick, right? The black stick. So I think we all have this prejudice, deep down, that really it's a pen and the dog is bad because the dog is ruining a perfectly good pen by chewing on it. So I think when you're explaining the pen to somebody, in my experience, I was explaining it just the last week to 1,000 business people, and 99% of people will understand. When you ask them, is the dog right or is the human right? 99% of people will say, well, both of them are right, because the dog can chew on it and the human can write with it. So I think if you run into the 1% of people who say it's really a pen and the dog's just too stupid to see it's a pen, I think then you have to slow down, and you can phrase it differently. You can say, I'm not asking who's right. I'm just saying, is it true that the dog sees it as a chew toy? and the human sees it as a pen. And then the person will say, yeah, the dog's wrong, but they see it that way. And then you can follow up into the function. And you can say, well, can the dog chew on it? Can the dog use it as a chew toy? And everybody will say, yeah, I mean, it's a pen. It's really a pen. But the dog can use it as a chew toy if they want to. That's okay. And the human can use it as a pen. Just get them that far. Just get them to agree that the dog can use it as a chew toy and the human can use it as a pen, and then that's far enough. You took them far enough, and you're okay. That person who refuses to say the dog has an equal right to see it as a chew toy, it sounds like they're being stubborn or something, but deep down, we all think that also. Deep down, we believe it's a pen that the dog is misusing. We don't think that the human is cheating the dog out of a good chew and writing a poem or something. You know, we never think that. So don't think this person is as unreasonable as they sound. But take it gently, go gently. I've had one person in a public talk, and I remember it was in Florida, and who just couldn't agree that the dog could see this as a chew toy. And then you just let it go, okay? Say Nyun Dingwa Dang Superman. Nyun Dingwa Dang Superman. In a debate in the courtyard, this is you can just say, I don't debate with crazy people. And then you just excuse yourself and you go find another partner. You really do. You go and find another guy to debate with, because you just go to the person and say, I love you, I respect you, and this isn't going to go anywhere. So, and then you go debate with somebody. Really, that's an option in the debate ground. So maybe you got to pull out the Nyun Dingwa sometimes.
So the question we have from the chat, Geshe, is why is this your greatest book? And, what makes it the greatest of all of your books for you?
That's a good question. I was in a 3-year retreat. I think Earl can tell you, and Connie, that in my 3-year retreat, we made ourselves a rule. We didn't read any books or write for a year and a half. So we were without writing, either reading or writing. We read the prayers, but we didn't read anything else. And we didn't write anything. So for the first time in my life, I had to be silent, really silent. And but I was thinking all the time, and I was working really, really hard. Like on the Yoga Sutra and things like that. So I was working really hard, but I couldn't write anything. By the way, the Yoga Sutra started after that, so it was like taking. My wife says I'm a very talkative person, and take a very talkative person, don't let them talk for a year and a half, and then tell them they can write a book. But they can't say anything. And then all your emotion, and reading it out loud, I think you can hear there's assonance and consonants. There are poetic devices happening in the wording, which were natural. I didn't plan them. But it's poetry. A lot of it comes out rhyming or things like that. And the vocabulary, I've never used vocabulary like ever since then. I don't even remember half those words. And the meaning is beautiful. The meaning is really, really beautiful. And that last debate really happened. I was in a debate, a public debate with all three monasteries present, and I had the same experience. I was caught in a corner, and I saw a way out, and I used it, and it was my glorious moment among many bad times in front of the best debaters of all three monasteries. And but the meaning of the book is very deep, and the way the second book ends, which you can't get for 6 months or something, is I think it's the best thing I ever wrote, for sure. So this book is kind of the warm-up. And then the next book is something beautiful happens. Something the most beautiful thing that could happen, I think, happens. So you'll just have to wait and see. Okay. Connie, any other questions?
I think that we are just about out for
Yay.
time. Thank you so much, Geshe, and now we're going to go over to Juan. Right?
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for asking, and thank you especially, Rosa, for your hard work, and Jigme for making the book happen. And I think we'll do it. This Audible book will be out this week. I think we're going to try. And then the ebook will be out this week, and then I hope to make an audio book for how yoga works. I think that just to listen to in the car and stuff like that. So, okay.
Thank you, Geshe, very much. I definitely think when you share this reading with us, you are also sharing part of your heart and part of your mind. And I feel very, very happy to be able to just listen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody else, for attending. What's going to happen next, again, is at 5. We're going to keep going with YSI course of the Yoga Sutra Chapter 4. So for all of you who have not signed up for this program, we really, really encourage you to sign up. You are still welcome. You won't miss anything, just sign up. You're gonna learn a lot. It's very fun, very excited. So the link to sign up for Yoga Sutra Chapter 4 is gonna be in the chat. We're gonna have then again later, after Earl, we're gonna have Sanskrit class. And okay, what happened today, Geshe Michael read and shared with us the second part of 3-part sessions about the Katrin book. Next time is going to happen this upcoming Friday. It's going to happen at 7 p.m. Arizona time. So join us as well this Friday. And if you want to get the book, you can do it at diamondcutterpress.com. There you can find the book. You can pre-order. The audiobook is going to be ready soon. So check it out. For the book, diamondcutterpress.com, link in the chat. And for signing up for the Yoga Studies Institute course, Yoga Sutra Chapter 4, the link is going to be there as well. So see you guys later. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.